Picture a grand hall in Berlin, winter of 1884. Chandeliers blaze overhead, crystal glasses clink, and men in polished uniforms and tailored suits gather around an enormous map. They speak of trade, progress, and civilization. But outside that room, millions of African lives hang in the balance. What happens here will change the destiny of an entire continent. It is November 15th, 1884. Berlin is cold, the city cloaked in mist and frost. But inside the palatial residence of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, warmth radiates from gilded walls, velvet curtains, and roaring fireplaces. 20 representatives from 14 European nations have gathered: Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, Spain, and more. Even the United States sends an observer, though it will play little part. The atmosphere is one of confidence, almost arrogance. At the center of the room, unfurled across a polished mahogany table, lies a massive map of Africa. Bright colors mark territories, but vast stretches remain blank, labeled only with rivers, deserts, and vague geographical notes. To the Europeans, these empty spaces mean opportunity. To Africans, they are not empty at all. They are kingdoms, families, cultures, histories thousands of years deep. But not a single African voice is present in this hall. Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, presides over the conference. Tall, imposing, with his iconic mustache and military posture, he pretends neutrality, but his goal is clear: elevate Germany into the ranks of global empires. Near him sits King Leopold II of Belgium's representatives. Behind his cultivated beard and calm speeches lies ruthless ambition. Leopold dreams of personal dominion over the Congo, a territory almost 80 times the size of his country. He cloaks his greed in the language of philanthropy. We bring Christianity, commerce, and civilization. Few in the room challenge him, for they too hunger for their share. The British delegation, sharp and calculating, has its eyes on the Nile, Egypt, and South Africa, the vital routes to India, the jewel of the British Empire. The French want West Africa, a belt stretching from Senegal to Chad. The Portuguese cling to Angola and Mozambique, invoking centuries-old claims. The Germans, newcomers to empire, demand their place in the sun. Each man carries maps, reports, treaties, but also greed, rivalry, and a willingness to carve Africa like a roast at a banquet. The conference begins with toasts and diplomatic speeches. Glasses of wine are raised, and words like progress, cooperation, and civilization fill the air. But beneath the civility lies tension. Each empire fears being outmaneuvered. Each wants to expand without sparking a European war. So they agree to rules. Rules not for Africa, but for themselves. Bismarck outlines the purpose: to regulate trade along the Congo and Niger rivers, to avoid conflict between European powers, and to establish what they call the principle of effective occupation. It is this principle that seals Africa's fate. No European claim to a territory will be recognized unless that power can prove actual control over it. Soldiers on the ground, treaties signed, forts built. With those words, the scramble for Africa becomes official. But at the heart of the conference lies one burning question: the fate of the Congo Basin. Leopold II's men argue passionately. They present the Congo not as a kingdom already filled with millions of people, but as a blank slate, a land of rivers waiting for commerce, of forests waiting for cultivation. They brandish documents from the so-called International Association of the Congo, a front Leopold has created to disguise his personal ambitions. Here, they say, will be a free trade zone for all nations, neutral, open, beneficial to civilization. The delegates nod, but they know the truth. It will be Leopold's personal empire. They approve it anyway. And with their signatures, the Congo Free State is born. Not free, not a state, but the private property of one king, who will unleash some of the most brutal exploitation in modern history. And what of Africa itself? The kingdoms of Ashanti, Benin, Oyo, Ethiopia, and hundreds more. The great trading cities of Timbuktu, Kano, and Zanzibar. The elders, chiefs, and rulers whose people will soon face invasion, taxation, and forced labor. They are not invited. They have no say. Their futures are being decided thousands of miles away in a room filled with smoke, wine, and polished boots. No African witnesses the strokes of pen that will slice rivers into borders and force rival ethnic groups into artificial nations. As the weeks go on, the conference becomes a theater of power. Delegates haggle over rivers and coasts they have never seen, quoting explorers and missionaries, sketching lines across deserts and jungles. A Portuguese diplomat claims a stretch of land in Central Africa, tracing a finger across the map. A British delegate objects. That river valley belongs to us by right of exploration. The French interject, demanding their corridor to link West Africa to the Red Sea. Bismarck listens, calculating how each concession might serve Germany's rise. No one asks what the people of those valleys, rivers, or forests want. Their voices are drowned by the rustle of maps and the scratching of pens. On February 26, 1885, after 3 months of negotiation, the Berlin Conference ends. The delegates shake hands, pose for portraits, and congratulate themselves on their civilized solution. But outside, the African continent trembles on the edge of catastrophe. What began in this gilded hall will unleash wars of conquest, forced labor, and famine. Borders drawn in Berlin will ignite conflicts for centuries to come. Families will be torn apart, kingdoms destroyed, cultures erased, and resources plundered. The men in that room return home to applause, but history remembers the Berlin Conference for what it truly was: the moment Africa was stolen with ink and paper. Behind closed doors, in the glitter of chandeliers, the fate of Africa was sealed. But the story does not end here, for in the years that followed, the ink of the Berlin Conference would be written again, not on paper, but in blood, across the fields and rivers of Africa.
When the maps were folded and the ink had dried in Berlin, Africa was no longer its own. But paper promises are fragile things. They must be enforced with rifles, ships, and blood. What began as strokes on a map would soon become the roar of cannons, the march of armies, and the breaking of kingdoms. The Berlin Conference ended in 1885 with polite applause, but within months, the race to enforce these claims began. European powers who had declared ownership of vast African lands suddenly faced a new reality. To keep them, they had to conquer them. The principle of effective occupation meant no empty claims would be respected. Colonizers had to build forts, plant flags, and, most of all, subdue resistance. And Africa resisted fiercely. Across the continent, kings, chiefs, and ordinary farmers rose to defend their homes. But the balance of power was brutally uneven. The Europeans came with Maxim guns, repeating rifles, and steel warships. Against these, Africa's spears, swords, and muskets often stood little chance. The Congo became the first theater of horror. With Leopold II now in control, his agents and soldiers spread across the river valleys, forcing entire villages into rubber collection. Those who failed to meet quotas were whipped, mutilated, or killed. Children's hands were severed to prove bullets had not been wasted. What had been called a free state became one of history's most infamous slave systems. In West Africa, the Ashanti Empire faced British expansion. The golden stool, sacred symbol of the Ashanti people, was targeted by the British, sparking war after war. In the end, Kumasi fell, and the Ashanti were folded into the colony of the Gold Coast. In East Africa, the Zanzibar Sultanate, once a powerful trading hub, fell under British protectorate. German forces marched into Tanganyika, sparking brutal uprisings like the Maji Maji Rebellion, where Africans, armed with sacred water they believed would turn bullets into water, charged European guns, only to be massacred by thousands. In southern Africa, the Zulu Kingdom, once the terror of the region under Shaka, faced British and Boer encroachment. The proud warriors of Isandlwana, who had once shocked the British Army, now faced relentless defeat as more troops, more guns, and more settlers poured in. Perhaps the cruelest legacy of Berlin was not just conquest, but cartography. The new European borders carved Africa like a butcher's knife, straight lines slashed across deserts, rivers, and forests with no regard for the people who lived there. The Somali people were split into 5 colonies under Britain, Italy, France, and later Ethiopia. The Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa Fulani, ancient peoples of West Africa, found themselves pressed into the artificial entity called Nigeria. Pastoralists were trapped on one side of a border while their grazing lands lay on another. Enemies were forced into the same colony. Allies were torn apart. It was not unity or order that these borders created, but division, divisions that echo in African conflicts to this day. And yet, Africa did not fall quietly. In Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II prepared for the inevitable. Buying rifles from European rivals, he forged alliances, modernized his army, and when the Italians invaded in 1896, the Ethiopians crushed them at the Battle of Adwa, one of the most stunning African victories against colonialism. In Sudan, the Mahdist revolt swept across the Nile Valley, with warriors fighting under the banner of religion to expel Egyptian and British rule. For years, the Mahdists held Khartoum and defied Europe. In West Africa, Samori Touré, the Black Napoleon, led his empire across modern Mali, Guinea, and Ivory Coast, fighting French forces in a war of mobility and guerrilla tactics. For 2 decades he resisted, retreating deeper into the forests, refusing to yield until his capture in 1898. In German Southwest Africa, Namibia, the Herero and Namakwa peoples rose against German settlers in 1904. But their revolt was met with extermination orders. Tens of thousands were driven into the desert, hunted, and starved, one of the first genocides of the 20th century. Resistance burned everywhere. And though many kingdoms fell, Their defiance lives on in history. For the ordinary African, the consequences were devastating. Farmers were taxed in cash, forcing them to abandon subsistence crops for cotton, cocoa, or coffee demanded by European markets. Traditional chiefs lost authority to foreign administrators. Forced labor projects built railroads, plantations, and mines, costing countless lives. Cultural suppression followed. Missionaries burned shrines, banned traditional dances, and sought to erase languages. Ancient systems of governance, diplomacy, and trade were replaced with European bureaucracy. The people of Africa had not been invited to Berlin, but they paid the price with their sweat, their blood, and their futures. European leaders told themselves they were bringing civilization. They built railroads, but only to mines and ports. They built schools, but only enough to train clerks for colonial offices. They built hospitals, but only near European settlements. The real goal was profit. Gold from the Rand mines of South Africa, rubber from the Congo, cocoa from Ghana, cotton from Sudan, diamonds, ivory, palm oil, and slaves disguised as laborers. And behind every shipment to Europe was a scar on Africa, a scar carved by forced labor, famine, and broken families. By the dawn of the 20th century, almost the entire continent was under European rule. Only two nations remained independent: Liberia, founded by freed African Americans, and Ethiopia, defended by Menelik's victory at Adwa. Everywhere else, the Ink of Berlin had been enforced with rifles and chains. The new colonial states did not represent Africa's people. They were machines for extraction, designed to funnel wealth outward and maintain European dominance. But within this oppression, seeds of resistance were planted. Africans began to form new identities, not just as Yoruba, Zulu, or Kikuyu, but as Nigerians, South Africans, Kenyans. Educated elites began to question why European ideals of freedom and democracy did not apply to colonized subjects. By the mid-20th century, those seeds would bloom into independence movements. The Berlin Conference was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. With maps and treaties, Europe divided a continent. With bullets and bayonets, it enforced its rule. But Africa did not vanish. Its people endured, resisted, and remembered. And long after the chandeliers of Berlin dimmed, the fires of liberation would rise from the ashes of conquest.